Thanks, Helen. This will be a kind of a live GIS exercise that requires input and feedback and discussion really from the audience. So this is a continuation of an exercise we organized last fall to, one, look at the Table Rock, just look at imagery of the Table Rock wildfire. And, you know, at its inception was, let's look at, did this wildfire, did its behavior, how it went down, was it influenced by Helene fuels? Don't know, let's talk about it. So to do that, it was just a virtual call, but we looked at the imagery that you're seeing now, which is summer 2025. Yes. And, you know, we recruited folks to be on the call who were firefighters on that fire. We wanted to hear about, you know, direct fire observations from the fire line. What did it look like? We pinned those observations on a map, right? Those are the yellow points you see, and we just got, you know, we were collecting anecdotes from folks who were on the burn to hear directly from folks, not from researchers from the top down, right, or applied scientists like me, but folks who were on the burn, who could talk about what they observed. And we wrapped all that up in the summary document. It's part of an overall strategy of really trying to get a handle on the legacy of Helene and whether it has started to or will continue to or will ever influence fire behavior, you know, on individual burn units. And so we're, you know, trying to, so this is round 2, right? We'll look at a couple of units today, hopefully. And again, the whole point is to kind of build a series, you know, collectively through your experience and knowledge, collectively get a sense of whether we think Helene, damage, etc., is impacting fire behavior. So that's literally all we're going to do. So anybody, Helen gave me the Devil's Fork prescribed burn. So that's what we're going to look at first. So anybody, so that you can be publicly seen, who in this room was on that burn this spring. Okay, so they're contractually obligated to talk. They'll be our leaders. But any other observations that y'all have from this region about, you know, similar burns, similar behavior, like when we hear about what this burn looked like, speak up, right? This is absolutely a discussion. I've never set foot on these units. I bring nothing to the table except I'm facilitating this discussion, all right, and bringing some imagery. So I'm going to set the mic down because I got to mess with GIS, but we'll take notes. I've got a note taker in the audience, and we'll export all of this discussion out as part of the post-meeting notes. So with all that fanfare. All right, so here is, make it as bright as I can, but here's Devil's Fork. So somebody give me the basics of what was this bird intended to do, just some basic stats, size, etc. Who owns this?
Okay. Basic Devil's Fork unit is a shared unit between South Carolina State Parks and a portion of it's the U.S. Forest Service, which is consistently managed by the Andrew Dickens Ranger District. Unit size is just a little over 200 acres. We have in sub-compartments of about 3 sub-compartments. Most of it ties into the lake on the east and on the west. We have a good dozer line that basically ties it in to the road all the way down to the lake to the road for that unit.
So this burn boundary on the west is not accurate. It's, you know, the boundary is somewhere kind of like in there. I just did it on the fly. That's right.
Yep.
Handy dandy laser pointer. If anybody wants to make a point and shoot the laser to spatially orient us, it's available. We'll pass that around. Keep going. First entry.
First off, it's going to be a great field trip tomorrow that you guys should attend. I'll speak at it. We'll go see it in person too. That is actually not a first entry. We burned in 2026. This February. Was burned 3 or 4 years prior, 23, and then a previous time, I think, 2018, 2019.
Okay. So let's look at imagery. Like, what's the condition of this unit leading up to Helene, leading up to the burn, to see if there's anything going on beforehand that would, kind of influence what we're the effects of the 2026 burn. So this is June 11th, 2025. Can we kill the lights? Can we kill all the lights? And if you can't see, move up if you want to. Okay, so I'll do a little bit of photo interpreting to the audience as we're seeing, but this is June 2025, like full leaf out, dark green, right, is intact closed canopy, or is intact foliage, trees. All this lighter area here is, if we can zoom in, we might be able to see better. This looks to me like woodland structure. Here's an individual, tree. Mature tree right there. It's kind of like buckshot. It's not full canopy, but not fully early successional or young forest. So some interesting patterns, and we see that here. We see it. We see a band of it here. I'm sure there's some topographic reasons for all of that. But does this match kind of the? So to describe from your point of view what this unit looked like before you guys burned.
This year particularly, all those inlets were greatly impacted by wind. So I'm sure you got some other imagery that you're going to show. But any of those inlets were directly impacted by straight line wind. So any hardwoods that were in there just got blown over basically. And so when he probably changes the imagery a little bit, if there's a fall or a winter look at it too, you'll start to see that a lot of those inlets just got basically straight line wind and knocked out on hardwood.
From Helene or from?
From Helene.
Okay.
Correct. And then we also had a follow-up ice storm this year in January that took out some pines.
Okay. So there's definitely some action going on, and when we see those changes in canopy structure, right, for a couple of years at least prior, fuels are different. There might be more curing, more light getting understory. So this is not just a purely closed canopy burn before the first entry. Worth noting that, so what I'm about to flash up here, and I'll stay a little zoomed in just so you can make out some kind of discernible features. Again, those kind of lighter green, lime green, or brown areas are some sort of canopy disturbance, less than full canopy. Here is Steve Norman's initial, wait, that's not the one. This is the Helene damage assessment from Steve Norman at the Southern Research Station. And okay, so there's color coding here, if you can see it. The warmer colors are more fire adapted ecozones, right? This is Steve Simone's ecozones. I put the Helene damage layer on top of that, clipped it out. So anything that's a color here was flagged as being disturbed by Helene. It's different forest communities that it's occurring in, but anything that's a color there this is a visual representation of what we were just talking about. There's some action, there's some changes to structure before this burn even happened. There's the big windup. Okay. Can you give us a general description of how the ignition plan, how the burn went, from this big picture?
So general conditions that day were in the upper 50s, RHs in the low 30s, good KVDI. We're still early in the burn season. That south corner of the unit, we basically hiked folks up, and on that far western portion, we'd spread folks out, fire in our baseline, and then we would fan folks out. Yep. So a lot of our resources were over here, and we did our test fire and spread folks out along the ridge. They would fire all the holding features on the west side, and then find the primary ridge, and everybody would start walking out. Basically, this unit split. There's an internal park road there. They would just find a dominant ridge, and we'd fire those ridges all the way down to the rest of the exit on the road.
Got it. Exiting, generally exiting,
That's right.
moving.
So we had it this way. We did have a group down here.
Okay.
They continued down the spine of the ridge, and exited by boat.
Oh, cool. Okay. Okay, so that's the general pattern. And overall, how would you characterize the day of the fire effects and fire behavior on the day of?
Great burn conditions. Some of that heavier fuel was receptive. We did a pretty good job of consumption of your 1s and 10s. Started getting up to the larger diameter fuel. It's still early season with a lot of fuel moisture, so we whittled it down a little bit, but we didn't take too much of the punch out of it.
Okay. So here's imagery from 3 days ago. Right, and I'll just swipe that back and forth. And here's where let's talk about what it shows. I'll kind of give you my read on it. And then let's talk about individual moments on that burn unit and what the fire looked like and match that to the effects that we're seeing in this image. So, why can't I swipe? Bear with me. Okay, I'll just turn it on off. Big picture, this, here's post-burn. Here was last summer pre-burn. This looks like kind of just you say a low intensity, kind of nibbling away at the mid-story, understory, certainly, maybe a little bit of impact to the canopy. And again, this is my 10-second take on it. But yeah, I mean, this looks like a continuation of a low to maybe moderate severity across the unit.
You're in create features.
Say again?
You're creating a feature right now.
Ah, that's why I can't. Thank you.
We've all been there.
And we're in. I can't process what you're telling me live, but thank you. So let's talk. So there's a notable. This is a few acres of higher severity. Maybe it's pond. Let's talk about that. But if you would, let's start at the test fire and kind of walk and tell us what fire behavior looked like. Let's compare that to what we see the effects are. So yeah, how did that first kind of that western front go in terms of fire behavior?
So you're up on that high side, just to kind of give your perspective, that wind damage occurred in large amounts up on that ridge top, so we actually had to use a large machine to do a lot of prep work for us to push some of those 1,000-hour fuels off the line to begin with, so they weren't pressuring us the whole time. Even though 1s and 10s were very receptive, early on we had a southern wind and western transport to push everything kind of out over into the lake itself. But that's a fairly steep ridge from the lake up to that point. You're going at a pretty good grade uphill. So that fire behavior was basically backing against those winds that were coming up the drainages there. And consuming, like I said, consuming the 1,000 or the 1s and 10s great, and then catching some of those 100s. And the 1,000s were catching and holding fire until the 1s and 10s finally consumed.
Got it. So backing down from this main ridge line, backing down this way. Okay. So yeah, and flame lengths ish,
Yeah, flame lengths 1 to 2 feet, and then if it was catching a head, obviously higher.
Gotcha. And so, in looking at this, at the imagery, yeah, not much changes to the canopy. Like, we're a little blind to what's going on below the canopy, but if we're just squinting at this and very broadly thinking, is this high, medium, low intensity and severity fire, I'd say it's pretty low. Like it's in, you're describing backing fire. So here we have, again, this might be a dub, but it's worth calling out. We have, backing fire moving down a north-ish aspect slope, and it's not resulting in much canopy change. The canopy change that does manifest was kind of there before, and so maybe a slight expansion. Did you notice fuels that had been down for a year or two? There was more of, I guess you're describing it, there's more fuels that you're seeing because of that past disturbance. So you're already taking that into account. So tell me about, let's go to this area right here, this brown patch. And again, brown's not bad, but it's higher intensity, maybe higher severity. What specifically, or can you recall what kind of happened there? Why that might have come about?
I think there was just a larger, I think the canopy applying to some of that section too, that was already occurred that had blown down as well, and then kind of add that with some of the ice damage that we had a little bit of loading in that pocket because of that burned a little bit more.
So, did you say there was more pine there?
I think in that whole section there was some pine
Okay.
mix.
I'm pulling up some wintertime imagery to see, and yeah, there's definitely a signature of, you know, some sort of evergreen canopy here. So even though it's brown, it might not even die, right? Like we've all seen plenty of pitch pine stands look brown day after burn, pop back up just fine the next year. Okay, so yeah, I'm looking like we've described generally what we're seeing. Any questions from the audience about, I'm trying to pull up relevant, yeah. Any questions from the audience about any of these effects that we're seeing or why they might have occurred or patterns that you've noticed that we're not talking about?
Can you pull back up the ecozone thing again? And
Yeah.
how those little areas that are open might have moved?
Yeah, so I've got an ecozone layer wall to wall somewhere. This is ecozones of just the Helene damaged pixels.
Gotcha.
And so shortleaf pine is pink, there's a fair amount of that. Dry mesic is medium green, yellow is dry oak. Continue.
Yeah, I was just curious. So, from the naked eye, it sort of looks like some of these blowdown areas might have expanded, perhaps due to fire. And I'm curious if there's any correlation between that and what we'd identify as more fire tolerant or fire adapted species or habitat areas. Basically, did it get hotter in places where we would expect it to? And if it did that cause those zones to widen?
Got it. Let's zoom way, and again, this is a few weeks after, so yeah, delayed mortality, things could change. So grain of salt for everything that we're talking about. It does seem like, you know, like I think we're seeing this road just be more visible right here. Yeah. So this is post-burn last year, post-burn last year. You know, it's not significant, but it does seem like it's consistently slightly, like the perimeters of these areas grow slightly. We certainly see that with a standard series of burn entries without Helene damage. I've looked at the GW, the Cherokee, and the Boone, and if you have, you know, a 10-acre circle of early that was created in the first burn, the next time you burn, that could absolutely be a 12-acre. It could be a 50-acre, but often you see just a slow growth of the polygons, if you will, of these different forest structures. So it wouldn't surprise me if we see a slight, you know, thinning everywhere due to this kind of low severity burn. About anybody have thoughts about the fire? Like, do we see differential results in fire adapted sites versus less fire adapted sites? Happy to throw that to the audience. When I did the same analysis that I was talking about for the GWJF, we found an order of magnitude more acreage of early successional open woodlands, i.e. moderate to high severity fire, in pine sites versus, say, cones. So we absolutely see on an average burn topography kind of controls. We're not overriding topography. On super hot burn events or wildfires, more often topography gets overridden, and you see kind of a 500-acre swath of early get created, cove, ridgetop, whatever. So there are some cases where the overriding weather conditions and override the topographic control. Here, this just seems like this lovely kind of buckshot of canopy heterogeneity kind of all across the unit. Any other kind of tactical decisions or other moments on this unit that you want to, are useful to kind of hear about, decisions you made and link those to the effects?
As far as tactical decisions, the firing plan was still dominating, going from west to east down the dominant ridges. What we just ran into is traversing it. The fact that we burned it 4 or 5 years ago, just your capacity to get through the woods and get folks moving downhill, even though you're in a downhill direction, you know, you're basically hiking over chunks of slash and stuff like that. And that was really one of our was some of the prep work that went into it due to the large volume of blowdown.
Yeah.
It took us a couple of weeks just in heavy machine work. And then the implementation part was just getting folks literally through the woods, because this was all hand unit, it was not air
Right.
conditioning at all.
Right. A couple of weeks as opposed to on average, what would that have been without?
We just went up there and reopened it with the dozer, with maybe a couple, 2 or 3 trees that blew down during the winter, blew down from a previous event. Go down there and support it by a couple sawyers for a day or two, and it would be reopened up on
Got it. So, 2 days versus 2 weeks.
with the machine. And
Yeah. So,
I have a
please.
thought. So I have a thought about this unit that, when we stepped into this season, burning season, we were all unsure, right, of what our burn units were gonna look like and how they were gonna burn given all that LED damage that's out there. And this burn unit just tells me that it's doable. That it's very doable to go back into a burn unit that has a lot of Helene damage and get the fire effects you want, that aren't consuming the canopy, that are burning at, 2-3 foot flame lengths. It's a nice perspective, and to see it through imagery this way reminds us that just because a burn unit has a lot of blowdown in it doesn't mean it's not burnable again. Does that make sense? It gives me hope.
What were the generally the weather parameters like KVDI or afternoon RH or day since preset? Do you remember any of those details? Or if it was it on the lower?
KPI very low for that time of year, so we had a lot of moisture still in the soil. Temperature was pretty low, but like I said, it was high 50s that day. RH bottomed out probably about 27, 28. So just a really nice day to be in the park, to be honest with you. And so conditions were ideal.
So it sounds like on that, modest, moderate, middle of the road prescription with some Helene fuels that we saw, represented here.
Well, it was more food for thought, but just like Helen said, her and I have discussed this before, is you're reintroducing fire in the back of these landscapes that have a lot of hurricane blowdown. You start to get into that philosophical, discussion that for us, from January to April is our burn season. That's when we put fire on the landscape. And so your fuel emissions are going to be a lot higher in January and February, and as you go into your burn season, they're usually going to drop down until your weather pattern changes. So reintroducing fire into these places that have a lot of heavy blowdown, maybe that's what you want to do early. That's your early season burns, to get some of that fire introduced back in there until we can start reeling that away, as opposed to waiting later in the year where your fuel moisture starts to take over and your heavier fuels become more available. Because that's when you start to get your holding concerns in your spot.
Yeah. Would you have, had it been later in the season or drier, would you have laid off this unit, or do you feel you had some wiggle room?
I think that the interior part of the unit itself, I would have been comfortable with. I think we could have got some more consumption out of the heavier fuel. From a holding perspective, I think we would have had a harder time on that western side where we were at with the winds that we had. Those conditions were perfect for what we were doing that day, but I probably would have threw another 2 or 3 UTVs up there and controlling that, because if it got spotted, and if it would have spotted across the line, it's also going to be in the blowdown and the additional stuff that we had to kind of pile and push.
We're almost out of time, so to summarize, and tell me if I get it wrong, but here's a unit that has been burned once, didn't have a long burn history, so still early in the burn regime. Putting fire back in after Helene, there was some Helene damage to contend with, but with a moderate prescription, we're still able to pull off a pretty low intensity, low severity burn. The legacy here about Helene is that it's a prep, that there was more time spent in doing the prep, and that, if you do this times 10 or times 20 on 20 different burn units, that time becomes capacity that you might or might not have. So we can still get the good effects that I think you were wanting, but the amount of time it took to get it was greater. So that's a good kind of lesson learned. Okay, yeah. So I'd love, if this sort of discussion to create, you know, a teachable, not a teachable moment, but like an anecdote or a lesson learned about one burn, we could do this on calls, you know, and create a whole vocabulary, right, of 10, 15, 20 units where we think through this, look at effects, talk about how it burned, look at Helene impacts one way or another, to build up this kind of institutional knowledge about where we are and where we're heading. That's definitely something the FLN could take on. So reach out, you know, to your landscape leads if you want that sort of thing. But I think it's a great, I like it because we hear from folks who are on the ground. We can look at effects afterwards and kind of match up and kind of do a full circle adaptive management. Here's what happened on the ground. Here's what it looks like afterwards. Does this make sense? Is there some lessons learned there? So we can look at if somebody wants to call out another burn unit. It'll take me a second to navigate there, but we can look at just some imagery from a couple days ago of that unit. Any areas you want to look at? Any recent burns, or let's burns from this year, where the imagery will be kind of fresh.
One other thing to add about this,
Please.
real quick, because there's a big change circumstance on the ground, so there's a discomfort from going in and burning some of these units because of all the additional blowdown. So it took these guys a lot more communication with me as far as the comfort level with burning these units. It's a lot more communication, a lot more talking about, hey, what does it look like out there? What are we going to get when we actually burn this? And so just bringing everybody along together as we're entering into some of these units that we're starting to burn after the
Yeah, no, that's great. You know, communicate, and then communicating what you all know to folks who weren't there. You know, how can we do it? So I'll put a plug in Steve Norman's high form tool, which looks at NDVI, a measure of greenness as measured from satellites, right? Greenness of a pixel, pre and post a disturbance, is a real, you don't need to code, I can't code. The tool that he created, he and his shop created, is really useful. It's real easy to use. You can go anywhere, look at any time period, probably using Sentinel within like the last decade, and you could generate, you know, a map of relative change of canopy greenness, i.e. changes in canopy structure. Real quick, like I've been using it for a few years up in the GWJF. I still do photo interpretation, but if any of you wanted to replicate, you know, mapping out spatially the changes that you're seeing in your burn units, Steve Norman and crew have made it a lot easier to do. So it's a really useful tool. And we can do a training on it. It wouldn't take long because again, it's not that complex. Other thoughts about this? And then we can zoom over to another unit. Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, state parks, but I think one thing that's cool about this, if I recall correctly, is that there's shared ownership of it. So I think that state parks paid for the excavator for a few weeks over it was, and the Forest Service provided an operator and the people to do all the moving of that. So obviously providing equipment to people for weeks, that's pricey, but there is shared ownership of making that happen, which is
Yeah, it's a good story for collaboration on the operational side. Cool. Okay, let's zoom real quick. We'll just zoom over somewhere and we'll see what it looks like. So what burn unit do you want to see, or wildfire from the spring do you want to see?
Adam, you got a good burn unit we can look at from the spring? Russell Mountain. Oh, okay.
Okay. Adam, come up here and navigate. Well, tell me how to get to Russell Mountain.
We were 200 acres right across the lake from that on
From where?
From that on that going east on
Okay.
that map.
That's convenient. Over like over.
Oh, on the other side of the lake. Okay, yeah, that might be.
Keep going. The upper left-hand corner. Down.
There?
Yeah, we run in that area closer to the point on the.
Yeah. So definitely some effects, you know, here. Yeah, and also some effect, what looked like older effects from previous burns that, you know, are greening up, but you can still see a change in structure here. What is that? I'll zoom in.
Yeah, that's outside of this burn, that's all lean damage.
Okay,
It'll be left-handed from there, down a little left-handed.
got it. So what's, just real quick.
That's out of the burn too, we didn't burn that.
Oh, no, okay. Okay. Well, I've set us up for failure because I can't navigate to what I asked you to give me, so that's my bad. But you know, we're definitely in a sense.
You're right, your cursor.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. Bad design on my part. That's on me. Anyway, there's a lot of imagery out there. There's a lot of data out there, like Steve Norman's Highform tool, and we're using it to kind of follow up. Oh, nice. You got one. Okay.
Yeah, our fire lines from here and back out this way.
I definitely, you know, there's a little warmth here, you know, indicating some heat, probably some thinned canopy here. Does that make sense with what you all
Yeah, we set
experienced?
fire uphill there.
Okay.
It got hotter there.
Yeah, and it had a nice little head run. Okay. So what's this? Because that looks burned. That just doesn't look like damage. That actually looks burned. Is that another burn or something else?
You have a spot on
Now you tell me. I'm like an asshole up here. Like, what is this? Oh yeah, we had a spot. That's done.
It wasn't that big, but.
What was the ice damage like in there?
I think it was kind of minimal in that area. It was mainly just.
So the Helene layer is up again, and yeah, there's the big polygon of it down there. But you're right, there wasn't. Didn't look like at least Helene damage. I guess you're asking about ice damage.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks everybody.